The wind was cruel that morning, carrying dust and hunger alike across the lonely plains. Mary's shoes had given up miles ago, their soles torn open like her heart, yet she kept walking toward the smoke that rose beyond the hill. A ranch, perhaps, and with it, a chance. Her dress was threadbare, her shawl no more than a rag of faded blue, but she clutched it close, as if dignity itself were stitched into its worn fabric. The child she'd lost last winter had taken with her not only warmth but will, and all that remained now was survival. By the time she reached the white fences of Hollow Creek Ranch, her feet were bleeding, her lips cracked from thirst. Cattle grazed lazily in the distance, and a man stood by the corral, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the gold of morning. He turned as she approached. He was tall, stern, the kind of man whose silence carried more weight than others' words. His hat shaded his eyes, but she felt the sharpness of his gaze as if it cut right through her. "Sir," she said softly, her voice trembling from more than cold, "I'll do anything, clean, cook, mend fences, milk, anything for work or a bit of bread." The man didn't speak for a moment. The horses snorted, and a breeze tugged at the brim of his hat. "This ranch doesn't take in beggars," he finally said, his voice deep and calm. Mary lowered her eyes. "I understand," she whispered. She turned, her body heavy with the weight of rejection she had long grown used to, when a soft cry broke the silence. Two little girls stood on the porch, watching her. The elder couldn't have been older than 8, her brown curls tied with a ribbon, while the younger hid behind her sister's skirt, eyes wide and curious. They were barefoot, their dresses clean but wrinkled, and something in the way they clung to each other struck a painful chord in Mary's chest. "Papa," the older one said timidly, "she looks hungry." The rancher's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He only studied Mary again, his eyes tracing the lines of hardship carved into her face. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "Mary Collins, sir." "Where are you from?" She hesitated, her lips quivering. "Nowhere that matters anymore." He nodded slowly, his gaze distant, as though weighing something unseen. "You say you can cook?" "Yes, sir." "Can you sew? Keep a house?" "I can, sir." He stepped closer, and for the first time she saw his eyes, gray, like the storm clouds before rain. "These girls need someone," he said quietly. "Their mother died 3 winters ago. Since then, they've had no woman to guide them, no softness in this house. I've got men to run the cattle, but I can't fill a little girl's heart." Mary blinked, unsure she'd heard right. "You're offering me work." He looked down at the dust between them. "I'm asking if you can be the mother my girls need." Her breath caught in her throat. "Sir, you'd have a roof, food, and pay enough to keep you decent. But it's not easy work. These girls need more than chores done. They need care, patience, someone who knows what loss feels like." His voice dropped lower, almost breaking. "Do you?" Mary met his eyes, and in that shared silence, he seemed to already know her answer. The days that followed tested her more than she imagined. The ranch was large, the chores endless. The girls, Anna and Grace, were shy, quiet, broken in the same ways their father was. At night, the big house echoed with emptiness. Mary scrubbed floors by lamplight and mended old curtains while the girls watched from the stairs, curious but unsure. It wasn't until the second week that Grace crept into the kitchen, clutching a torn doll. "Miss Mary," she whispered, "can you fix her dress?" Mary smiled gently, setting down the pot she'd been scrubbing. "Of course, darling. Bring her here." The little girl climbed onto her lap, her small fingers tracing the frayed fabric as Mary sewed. When she was done, Grace leaned her head against her shoulder. "You smell like bread," she murmured sleepily. That night, for the first time in months, Mary cried quietly in her room, not from pain, but from something she had nearly forgotten existed. The rancher, whose name she learned was John Whitlock, kept to himself most days. He worked on to dusk, seldom speaking except to give orders. But sometimes, when he came in from the fields, he would pause at the doorway and listen to the laughter that had slowly returned to his home. He'd see Mary reading to the girls by firelight, her soft voice weaving warmth into the cold corners of the house. Once, he found her outside, repairing a broken fence post. "You don't need to do that," he said, taking the hammer from her hand. She smiled faintly. "If I wait for you to fix everything, sir, we'll both die old before the fence stands again." He chuckled for the first time in years, a low, rusty sound that startled even him. "You're not afraid to speak plain." Hardship takes away the luxury of pretending, she replied. There was something in the way she said it, quiet but sure, that made him see her differently from that day on. Weeks turned into months. The girls flourished under Mary's care. Anna began to smile again, and Grace followed her around like a shadow. The house that once felt hollow now breathed with life. John watched her one evening as she brushed the girl's hair by the window, the sunset painting her in gold. For the first time, he saw not the rags she had arrived in, but the grace she carried, something rare and enduring. But one morning, a man rode up to the ranch, a face from Mary's past. His clothes were fine, but his eyes were cold. "Mary Collins," he called, dismounting with a smirk. "You've been hard to find." John stepped between them, his tone unreadable. "You know this woman. She was my wife," the man sneered. "Ran off when our baby died. Thought she could vanish, but debts don't vanish, do they?" Mary froze, her hands trembling. "You forfeited your right to call me wife the day you sold everything we owned for drink," she said, her voice steady though her heart raced. The man laughed bitterly. "Still sharp, I see. You owe me, Mary." John's hand twitched near his holster, but his voice remained calm. "You'll leave my land," he said. "Your land." The man spat. "You can keep it. But she'll come back with me, or I'll tell every town between here and Laramie what kind of woman you're harboring." Mary turned to John, her eyes full of shame and fear. "I'll go," she whispered. "He won't stop until he ruins you." John's jaw tightened. "You're not going anywhere." He stepped closer to the man. "You can shout to the heavens for all I care. But if you try to take her, I'll make sure you never ride again." The man saw the steel in his eyes and faltered. After a tense moment, he spat in the dirt and mounted his horse. "She ain't worth it," he muttered before riding off. When he was gone, Mary fell to her knees, shaking. "You didn't have to do that," she said. John knelt beside her, his voice low. "You don't run from pain, Mary. You build from it. That's what you've done here." Tears welled in her eyes. "You don't know what I've lost." "I don't need to," he said gently. "I can see what you've given." After that day, something unspoken grew between them, quiet, patient, like the first shoots of spring after a long winter. He'd find her humming in the kitchen, and their eyes would meet just long enough for warmth to pass between them. The girls began calling her Mama, without realizing when they started. And one night, as the fire crackled low, John stood by the doorway watching her tuck the girls into bed. When she turned, he spoke softly, almost hesitant. "You came here begging for work," he said. "But you gave this home back its heart. I asked you once to be the mother my girls need." He took a step closer, his voice deep with emotion. "But now I find myself wondering, could you also be the woman I need?" Mary looked at him, her heart stilled in her chest. The ranch that once felt like a place of refuge now felt like destiny itself. The wind outside howled across the plains, but inside that old ranch house, something beautiful took root, a love born not from convenience or pity, but from the quiet recognition of two souls who had known too much pain and still found the courage to choose kindness again. The nights that followed were different. The house that had once gone dark after sunset now held a soft, lingering glow. John would find reasons to linger longer by the fire after supper, his chair angled just enough to catch glimpses of Mary as she cleared dishes or sewed by lamplight. He spoke little, but his silence had changed. It wasn't heavy anymore, it was watchful, alive with something unspoken. Mary tried not to notice. She told herself she was only there for the girls, only there until she could save enough to build a life of her own. But each morning when little Grace would crawl into her lap and tug her sleeve with sleepy eyes, whispering, "Mama, can we have pancakes?" the word pierced her heart in a way she didn't know whether to fear or treasure. She didn't correct the child. Not once. One evening, after a long day of mending fences and cooking stew, John came in late, dust clinging to his coat. He looked exhausted but smiled faintly when he saw the lamp still burning in the kitchen. "You should have gone to bed hours ago," he said softly. Mary turned, wiping her hands on her apron. "And miss seeing you drag your boots across my clean floor," she teased, her tone gentle. He chuckled quietly, setting his hat on the table. "Fair point." There was a pause. The fire crackled, shadows dancing across the walls. Then he said, almost hesitantly, "You ever think about leaving here, Mary?" She froze for a moment. "Leaving?" He nodded. "I mean, I know you didn't plan on staying. Maybe there's somewhere else you'd rather be." She looked down at her hands, the calluses softening from months of steady work. Once, I thought there might be. But now, she smiled faintly, her voice dropping. I don't know where else I'd go. There's nowhere that feels as much like home as this place. John's eyes softened. Home, he repeated quietly, as if tasting the word for the first time in years. The silence between them stretched, filled with something neither dared name. Then the faint creak of footsteps interrupted it. Anna, the older girl, appeared in her nightdress, clutching a book to her chest. Papa, she whispered, you didn't read tonight. He looked up at her, then at Mary. Well, he said, maybe we can fix that. Mary smiled. Go on, Anna. I'll tidy up. But the girl shook her head. No, Miss Mary reads better. John laughed softly. I reckon she does. So Mary sat by the fire, the girls nestled close as she opened the worn book and began to read. Her voice was soft but steady, weaving through the room like a lullaby. John leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching the three of them, the picture of everything he'd lost and somehow found again. When the girls finally drifted off, he took the book from her hands. They never sleep that quick when I read, he said quietly. You make them feel safe, she replied. That's why they sleep. He looked at her for a long moment, something deep and searching in his gaze. You do that, too. Her breath caught, but she said nothing. Words, she knew, could break fragile things. The months passed. Spring crept slowly into summer, painting the ranch in shades of green and gold. The cattle grew fat, the streams clear, and laughter became as common in the house as the morning light. But with the season's change came new troubles. One morning, a letter arrived by post, a notice from the bank. John read it at the kitchen table, his jaw tightening. Mary noticed the color drain from his face. Bad news, she asked softly. He folded the paper, his voice quiet. I took a loan a few years back after my wife passed. Needed to keep the ranch running. The market's turned, and now, they're calling it in. Can you pay it? He shook his head. Not without selling half the herd. Maybe the land. Mary's heart clenched. This ranch is all you have. He met her gaze, weary but proud. It's all my girls have. I'll do whatever I must. That evening, when the girls were asleep, Mary sat by the fire, staring at the embers. She thought of how far they'd all come, how the girls laughed again, how John had begun to smile, how the house that once echoed with sorrow now held warmth. And she knew she couldn't stand by and watch it all crumble. The next morning, she rode into town before dawn. She hadn't ridden a horse in years, but determination steadied her. At the general store, she found work sewing and mending clothes. When they offered little pay, she took extra work laundering and cleaning for the local inn. Every dollar she earned, she kept hidden in a tin under the floorboard by her bed. John didn't notice at first. He only saw that she was tired more often, that her hands were raw and her shoulders ached. Mary, he said one night, you've been running yourself ragged. What's going on? She forced a smile. Just keeping busy, sir. Busy enough to fall asleep at the supper table. He asked, raising a brow. Her lips curved faintly. Guess I'm not as strong as I used to be. He studied her, but she turned away, unwilling to lie yet unable to tell the truth. Weeks passed before the day came when she finally placed the envelope on the table before him. What's this? He asked. Enough to keep the ranch, she said softly. For now. He stared at her, uncomprehending. Mary, where did this come from? I've been working in town. Early mornings, after chores. It's not much, but. He stood abruptly. You've been doing all that. Alone. She nodded. I couldn't just watch you lose everything. John's expression hardened, though his voice trembled. You think I'd want that from you? To see you wear yourself thin for me. She stepped closer, her voice low and fierce. This isn't about you, John. It's about them. About Anna and Grace. This ranch is their home. You gave me a place when I had none. Let me do the same. He stared at her for a long time, the tension in him slowly melting away. Then he exhaled, a sound somewhere between a sigh and a laugh. You're a stubborn woman. I've been called worse. He smiled faintly. You're impossible. Maybe, she said, looking up at him. But we're not giving up. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat on the porch, listening to the night wind and the distant call of coyotes, thinking of how she'd changed everything. Not just the ranch, but him. He remembered the first day she'd arrived, a thin shadow in rags, trembling but proud. And now, she was the strength holding everything together. He realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd thought of his late wife without also thinking of Mary. It wasn't that one replaced the other, it was that Mary had brought life where death once ruled. A few weeks later, another storm came, not from the bank this time but from the sky itself. The rains started in the middle of the night. By morning, the creek had swelled, tearing through fences and washing away feed sheds. John and the ranch hands fought to save what they could, while Mary kept the girls safe inside. But when the lightning struck the north barn, everything changed. John shouted for the men to bring buckets, but the flames were wild. The heat burned against his face, and through the chaos, he heard a scream, Grace's small voice calling, "Papa." "Miss Mary." He turned to see the little girl running toward the barn, her doll left in the hay. Mary was already there, sprinting through the mud. "Mary!" he shouted. "Get back!" But she didn't stop. She threw her shawl over her head and ran into the smoke. John's heart froze. He dropped the bucket and charged after her. Inside, the world was fire. The rafters groaned above, sparks raining down like stars turned to ash. Mary was on her knees, coughing, clutching the doll in one hand and shielding Grace with the other. He grabbed them both, pulling them out just as the roof gave way. They fell into the mud, coughing, gasping for breath. Rain poured down in sheets, hissing as it met the flames. John held them close, Mary shaking, Grace sobbing. "You fool," he whispered hoarsely, half angry, half broken. "You could have died." Mary's eyes met his through the rain. "She's just a child. I couldn't lose another." Her words hit him like a blow. He pulled her into his arms, rain soaking through his shirt, her body trembling against his. "You won't," he said fiercely. "Not while I'm breathing." That night, after the storm finally passed, the barn lay in ruins. But the family, because that's what they had become, was safe. John sat by Mary's bedside as she rested, her arm bandaged from a burn. When her eyes fluttered open, he smiled faintly. "You're supposed to be the sensible one." She managed a weak smile. "And you're supposed to stop me when I'm not." "I tried. Not hard enough." He laughed softly, shaking his head. "No, I suppose not." Then his voice grew quieter. "I don't know what I'd have done if I lost you." She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. "You won't have to find out." Time passed again, as it always does. The barn was rebuilt with the help of neighbors and friends, and for every board nailed into place, something deeper settled between John and Mary, a bond forged by more than shared hardship. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, painting the sky in gold and crimson, John called the girls and Mary out to the porch. He had something in his hand, a small wooden box. "Mary," he began, his voice steady but quiet, "when you came here, I didn't know what I was asking. I said I needed someone to be a mother to my girls. I didn't realize I was asking for the one thing that could save us all." Mary's breath caught. "John." He opened the box. Inside was a simple gold ring, worn at the edges but polished with care. "It was my mother's," he said. "I kept it because I didn't know what else to hold on to. Now I think it's time I give it a new story." Tears welled in her eyes as the girls gasped softly beside her. "I don't expect anything fancy," he continued. "Just your hand, and your heart, if you're willing to share them with me and my girls." Mary's voice trembled. "You don't have to." He took her hand gently, his thumb brushing over her scarred knuckles. "I know I don't. But I want to. You've given us a home again, Mary. Let me give you a name that comes with it." The sky was dimming, the first stars glinting through the twilight. Mary looked down at the girls, and, "Mary. Let me give you a name that comes with it." The sky was dimming, the first stars glinting through the twilight. Mary looked down at the girls, who clung to her dress, their eyes wide with hope. Then she looked back at John, and the years of pain, loss, and wandering seemed to dissolve all at once. Her lips trembled, but her smile was steady. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, John, I'll stay." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and for a long, breathless moment, neither spoke. The girls threw their arms around them both, laughter breaking through tears. And as night fell across Hollow Creek Ranch, the world seemed quiet again, peaceful in a way it hadn't been for years. The storms had passed, the debts were fading, and in their place grew something stronger, something that neither wind nor fire could destroy. Love, humble and hard-earned, bloomed in that house where once there had only been loss. And as the lamplight flickered in the window, two hearts that had been broken by life finally found a home, in each other. The years that followed did not arrive with fanfare or miracles, but with the quiet rhythm of steady living, the kind that mends what grief once tore apart. Mary became more than the woman who had come in rags begging for work. She became the pulse of Hollow Creek Ranch, the warmth that turned a house of sorrow into a home of laughter. The girls grew quickly, their childhood stitched with memories of love, learning, and the kind of comfort only a mother's touch could bring. Anna took after her father, strong-willed, sharp, determined to learn the trade of the ranch. Grace, soft-spoken and tender-hearted, followed Mary everywhere, always humming while she worked, as though she had inherited Mary's gentle soul. John would often watch them from the porch, his heart full in a way it hadn't been since his youth. The sight of Mary hanging linens in the sun while Grace played by her skirts and Anna carried feed to the horses filled him with a peace that had once seemed unreachable. The land, too, seemed to heal alongside them. The soil grew rich again, the cattle thrived, and neighbors spoke of Hollow Creek as a place blessed by grace itself. Mary never spoke much of her past again. It wasn't because she hid it, it was because she had finally laid it to rest. The pain that once followed her like a shadow had loosened its hold. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, she would light a small candle by the window and whisper a prayer for the child she had lost long ago. But she no longer cried for what was gone. She smiled, knowing her love had not died, it had only changed shape. It had been reborn in the little arms that hugged her every morning, in John's steady hand that found hers under the supper table, and in the laughter that echoed across the fields at dusk. One late autumn, a letter arrived addressed to Mary. She recognized the handwriting before she opened it, the man she once called husband. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes stayed calm as she read. He wrote of regret, of years wasted, of illness that now kept him bedridden. He asked for forgiveness, not mercy. She sat for a long time, the paper trembling slightly between her fingers. When John entered the room, she handed it to him silently. He read it through, then looked at her, waiting. "What will you do?" he asked quietly. Mary folded the letter and placed it back in its envelope. "I'll forgive him," she said softly. "Not because he deserves it, but because I need to let the last part of that pain go. It's the only way to be free." John nodded, pride and tenderness mingling in his gaze. "That's why I love you," he said. "You've got more strength in you than most men I know." Mary smiled faintly. "Strength isn't never breaking, John. It's learning how to stand after you do." She wrote back that night, only a few lines long. No bitterness, no blame, just peace. It was the last time she ever spoke of her old life. The winters grew gentler after that, or perhaps they only felt that way because hearts were warmer inside the house. The girls learned to ride, to cook, to pray, and to dream. Mary taught them how to sew and how to listen, while John taught them the land, the way it breathed, the way it gave, and the way it demanded care in return. When Anna turned 16, a young ranch hand began to take notice. Mary caught the glances, the shy smiles, and remembered her own girlhood, the one she had lost too early. She spoke to Anna one evening under the stars, her voice full of both warning and warmth. "Love is not about finding someone to live with, my dear," she said softly. "It's about finding someone you can't live without. Someone who sees your scars and stays anyway." Anna listened, eyes bright, her mother's words sinking deep into the places only truth could reach. Years later, when both daughters married and built homes of their own not far from the ranch, Mary felt a bittersweet ache settle in her chest. She and John stood on the porch, watching their girls ride off together, laughter ringing across the fields. "They're good women," John said quietly. "They had a good father," she replied. He smiled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "And a better mother." The sun dipped low that evening, gilding the ranch in a soft amber glow. The cattle moved slow, the horses grazed in the distance, and the wind carried the faint scent of wild sage. John turned to her after a while, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. "You know," he said, "I used to think I saved you that day, when you came here in rags, begging for work." Mary looked up at him, smiling. "Maybe you did." He shook his head. "No, Mary. You saved us. All of us." She didn't argue. She just leaned into him, her head resting against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of a heart she had come to know as home. Time, as it does, moved on. The ranch changed hands when John grew too old to ride, but it never left the family. The girls returned often with children of their own, filling the rooms once more with laughter and the smell of bread baking in the oven. Mary grew gray and thin, her hands slower, but her eyes never lost their light. On the last spring morning of her life, she sat on the porch wrapped in her old blue shawl, the same one she had worn the day she first arrived at Hollow Creek. The air was cool and sweet with the scent of lilac. The sun rose slow over the fields, and she watched it as though greeting an old friend. John, older now and frail, came to sit beside her. Their hands found each other, the way they always had. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The years of hardship, the tears, the storms, all of it had led to this quiet peace. The story that began with a woman in rags and a man too broken to hope had become something sacred, something strong enough to last beyond them both. And when the time came for Mary to close her eyes for the last time, it wasn't with fear or sorrow. It was with the stillness of someone who knew she had given everything that mattered, and been given more in return. The ranch carried on long after, under new seasons and new names. But every child who grew up there heard the same story whispered by the fire, the story of the woman who came in rags and became the mother who saved them all. And sometimes, when the evening wind moved gently through the grass, it carried her laughter across the fields, light and familiar, like the echo of grace itself. Because love, once sown into the earth of a place, never truly fades. It lingers, in the soil, in the walls, in the hearts of those who remember. It was said that Hollow Creek would forever be touched by that kind of love, the kind born from kindness, courage, and a second chance at life. And in that place, where once there had been silence and sorrow, the wind still whispered her name with every passing dawn. Mary, the woman who came with nothing, and gave everything.